one, we're going to go from the inferior sagittal sinus and take it down to the posterior tibial artery. So from the inferior sagittal sinus, it's then going to go into the straight sinus. From the straight sinus, it then heads into the confluence of sinuses. From the confluence of sinuses, it then heads into the transverse sinus. From the transverse sinus, it then heads into the sigmoid sinus. From the sigmoid sinus, it then heads through the jugular foramen, which you should know. You have to remember that it then heads into the jugular foramen, which is where the internal jugular vein is going to be located. So the internal jugular vein. Okay. The internal jugular vein is then going to go down and meet up with the subclavian vein. You could choose whether it's left or right. It's going to the same place, so it's not really going to matter all that much. From the subclavian vein, it then is going to go into the brachiocephalic vein. From the brachiocephalic vein, it then heads into the superior vena cava. Again, you cannot abbreviate on the exam. I'm just abbreviating for time's sake. Superior vena cava is then going to bring it into the right atrium. From the right atrium, it then goes into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it then heads into the pulmonary artery. From the pulmonary artery, it then goes into the lungs. From the lungs, it then heads into the pulmonary veins. From the pulmonary vein, it then heads into the left atrium. From the left atrium, it then heads into the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, it then heads into the ascending aorta. From the ascending aorta, it does the arch of the aorta. From the arch of the aorta, it then is going to go down the descending aorta. Now again, you don't have to, for this part of the exam, write down descending thoracic aorta, descending abdominal aorta. I'll let you just write down descending aorta. But from the descending aorta, it then heads down into the left or the right, whichever one you want to pick, the left or right common iliac artery. From the common iliac artery, it then going to go into the external iliac artery. From the external iliac artery, once it passes the inguinal ligament, it then is going to go into the femoral artery. From the femoral artery, remember the femoral artery starts anterior, it dives deep within the thigh, it then exits posteriorly in the thigh, and then as it passes behind the kneecap on the back of your leg, it then heads into the popliteal artery. And then if you just follow the popliteal artery down, it then brings you right into the posterior tibial artery. And we have now gone from the inferior sagittal sinus to the posterior tibial artery. Please make sure you remember to do the figure 8 pulmonary and systemic circulation circuits and be able to write that on the exam, because this, as well as those circuits, will be expected to be written out. Good luck.